What happens when Hollywood's hottest young star walks into the lion's den of daytime television and refuses to back down? When Sydney Sweeney stepped onto The View set, nobody expected the conversation about her controversial American Eagle campaign to explode into television history. What started as a routine promotional appearance turned into the most shocking confrontation the show has ever witnessed. And by the end of it, security was called and one of them was forcibly removed from the studio. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below telling me which side you think was right in this explosive showdown. The tension was palpable from the moment Sydney walked onto the set. Her blonde hair perfectly styled, wearing a crisp white blazer that seemed almost symbolic given the controversy swirling around her latest advertisement. The audience applauded politely, but there was an undercurrent of anticipation. Everyone knew this wasn't going to be just another celebrity fluff piece. Joy Behar, seated at her usual spot at the table, had that look in her eyes, the one that regular viewers knew meant she was ready for battle. Her notes were spread out in front of her, clearly more prepared than usual for what should have been a simple interview about Sydney's upcoming projects. "Welcome back to The View, everyone," Whoopi Goldberg said, her voice carrying its usual authority. "We're here with Sydney Sweeney, star of Euphoria, The White Lotus, and now apparently the center of quite the advertising storm. Sydney, thanks for being here." Sydney smiled graciously, settling into her chair with the poise of someone who had done hundreds of these interviews. "Thanks for having me, Whoopi. Always a pleasure to be here." But Joy wasn't waiting for pleasantries. She leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on that sharp edge that had become her trademark over the years. "Sydney, let's talk about this American Eagle campaign. You had to know that tagline about your great genes was going to cause problems. In today's climate, with everything we know about the history of eugenics in this country, how could you not see the implications?" The audience fell silent. This was happening faster than anyone expected. Sydney's smile didn't waver, but there was a subtle shift in her posture, a straightening of her spine that suggested she wasn't going to roll over. "Joy, with all due respect, I think you're reading way too much into what was clearly a play on words," Sydney replied, her voice calm but firm. "It's a jeans commercial. The creative team thought it was clever wordplay. To suggest there's some hidden eugenics message is frankly ridiculous." Joy's eyebrows shot up. "Ridiculous? Sydney, do you understand the history of genetic superiority? Arguments in this country? Do you understand what it means when a blonde, blue-eyed actress is literally being celebrated for her good genes?" "I understand history just fine, Joy," Sydney shot back, and now there was steel in her voice. "But I also understand the difference between a clothing advertisement and Nazi propaganda. And frankly, I'm surprised that someone of your intelligence would conflate the two." The temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees. Whoopi was looking between them like a referee trying to decide when to step in. Sarah N shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but Joy was just getting started. "My intelligence." Joy's voice rose a notch. "My intelligence tells me that in 2025, we should be more careful about the messages we send, especially when they involve celebrating whiteness and conventional beauty standards at a time when this country is struggling with issues of racial equity." Sydney leaned forward now, matching Joy's intensity. "And my intelligence tells me that you're manufacturing outrage where none should exist. This is exactly the kind of performative activism that's dividing this country. You're taking an innocent advertisement and turning it into some grand conspiracy theory." "Performative activism." Joy's voice cracked like a whip. "Excuse me, young lady, but I've been fighting for civil rights since before you were born. Don't you dare lecture me about what is and isn't activism." The audience was completely silent now, sensing that this had moved far beyond typical daytime television fare. Cameras captured every micro-expression, every slight movement. This was raw, unfiltered conflict playing out in real time. Sydney's composure was still intact, but barely. "And I've been working in an industry that scrutinizes every word, every image, every choice I make since I was a teenager. I know what real discrimination looks like, and this isn't it. This is you creating a problem where none exists because it fits your narrative." Joy slammed her hand on the table, the sound echoing through the studio like a gunshot. My narrative is that words matter. Imagery matters. And when you put yourself out there as the poster child for genetic superiority, you bear some responsibility for that message. Genetic superiority. Sydney's voice was incredulous. Now, her carefully maintained media training starting to crack. Are you listening to yourself? It's a jeans commercial. Joy, I'm not running for office on a platform of racial purity. I'm selling denim. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that Sydney was wearing jeans at that very moment. American Eagle jeans. In fact, though, whether that was intentional or coincidental, no one could say. Joy wasn't backing down. You can minimize it all you want, but that doesn't change the impact. When young girls see that ad, when they see you being celebrated for your genes, your genetics, what message do you think that sends to girls who don't look like you? Sydney's composure finally snapped. What message does it send when women like you tear down other women for succeeding? What message does it send when you take every opportunity to find offense, to find division, to find ways to make people feel guilty for existing in their own skin? The studio erupted, not in applause, but in shocked murmurs and gasps. This was uncharted territory for The View. Arguments were common, but this level of personal attack was unprecedented. Joy's face was flushed now, her voice shaking with anger. How dare you suggest that holding you accountable for your choices is tearing you down? How dare you turn this around and make yourself the victim when you're the one who chose to participate in advertising that celebrates genetic privilege? Genetic privilege. Sydney was standing now, though she hadn't consciously decided to do so. Do you hear yourself? You're talking about me like I'm some sort of master race propagandist because I did a commercial for a clothing company. This is insanity. Whoopi finally tried to intervene. Ladies, let's take a breath here. But Joy cut her off. No, Whoopi, this is important. This young woman needs to understand that her platform comes with responsibility. She can't just put whatever message she wants out there without consequences. Sydney whirled on her. My platform, my responsibility. Joy, you have a platform, too. You reach millions of people every day. And you're using that platform right now to bully a young woman for doing her job. Where's your responsibility in that? The accusation hung in the air like smoke. The word bully had been said, and there was no taking it back. Joy's face went from flushed to pale in an instant. Bully. Joy's voice was quiet now, dangerously quiet. You think I'm bullying you by asking you to be accountable for your choices? I think you're bullying me by twisting an innocent advertisement into something sinister so you can grandstand about social justice, Sydney replied, her voice equally quiet but filled with conviction. I think you're bullying me by suggesting I'm responsible for every interpretation someone might have of a piece of creative advertising that I had no part in writing or conceptualizing. The silence that followed was deafening. This was no longer a debate about advertising or social responsibility. This had become something much more personal, much more volatile, and everyone in that studio knew that someone was about to cross a line from which there would be no return. Joy's hands were trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the table. The accusation of bullying had clearly struck a nerve deeper than anyone expected. When she spoke again, her voice carried decades of frustration and indignation. You want to know what bullying looks like, Sydney? Bullying is when people like me had to fight for every opportunity we got in this business. While people like you walk in and get handed everything because you fit a certain look, a certain image. Bullying is when we're told to be grateful for the scraps while the golden girls get the feast. Sydney's eyes flashed with something dangerous. People like me, people like you. Are we really going to do this? Joy, are we really going to reduce each other to stereotypes on national television? You reduced yourself to a stereotype the moment you agreed to that campaign. Joy fired back. You literally allowed yourself to be marketed as genetically superior and now you want to act like the victim when someone calls it out. The other hosts were frozen in their seats. Sarah N. looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Alyssa Farah Griffin was staring wide-eyed at the spectacle unfolding before her. Even Whoopi, veteran of countless television confrontations, seemed unsure how to proceed. Sydney took a step closer to the table, her voice dropping to a level that somehow made it more menacing than if she had shouted. I never marketed myself as anything other than an actress doing her job. You're the one who decided to attach all this meaning to it. You're the one who chose to see racism and eugenics in a clothing advertisement. That says more about your mindset than it does about mine. Joy shot to her feet, her chair rolling backward from the force. My mindset. My mindset comes from living through decades of watching this industry, this country celebrate one type of beauty, one type of person, while everyone else fights for crumbs. My mindset comes from experience you clearly don't have and wisdom you clearly lack. Wisdom, Sydney laughed, but there was no humor in it. Is it wisdom to attack someone for their appearance? Is it wisdom to suggest that I'm somehow less deserving of opportunities because of how I look? Because that's exactly what you're doing right now. The audience was completely silent, but the tension was so thick it was almost audible. Cameras continued to roll, capturing every moment of what was quickly becoming the most explosive daytime television moment in years. Joy's voice rose again, all pretense of professional composure abandoned. I'm saying that with great privilege comes great responsibility, and you're shirking that responsibility by pretending your choices don't have consequences. And I'm saying that you're manufacturing consequences that don't exist. Sydney shot back. You're creating division where there should be none. You're turning a simple commercial into a racial battleground because it serves your political agenda. Political agenda. Joy's voice cracked with indignation. My political agenda is equality. My political agenda is making sure that young girls of all colors see themselves represented in media, not just blonde, blue-eyed actresses selling the idea that their genetics make them special. Sydney moved even closer to the table now, her voice deadly quiet. And my agenda is doing my job without being lectured by someone who thinks she has the moral authority to police every decision I make. Your equality looks a lot like tearing down other women to make yourself feel superior. That was the breaking point. Joy's face contorted with rage and she leaned forward over the table. Superior. You want to talk about superior? You're standing there lecturing me about women supporting women while you participate in advertising that literally celebrates genetic superiority. The irony is unbelievable. The only thing that's unbelievable, Sydney replied, her voice rising to match Joy's volume, is that you think you have the right to determine what messages are acceptable for other people to convey. Who made you the arbiter of social responsibility? Who gave you the authority to decide what's offensive and what isn't? Joy slammed both hands on the table this time, the sound reverberating through the studio. Experience gave me that authority. Years of fighting for representation, for equality, for the right to be heard in a world that wanted to silence voices like mine. Something you wouldn't understand because you've never had to fight for anything. Sydney's composure finally shattered completely. Never had to fight for anything. Are you serious right now? Do you have any idea what it's like to have every aspect of your appearance, your talent, your worth dissected by people like you? Do you know what it's like to be told you're only successful because of how you look, not because of your work, your dedication, your skill? Boo-hoo, Joy said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Poor little Sydney, criticized for participating in problematic advertising. Meanwhile, women of color can't even get cast in major roles, but sure, you're the real victim here. The sarcasm was a mistake. Sydney's eyes blazed with fury. And when she spoke, her voice carried a venom that shocked everyone in the studio. You know what, Joy? You're right. I am blonde. I am conventionally attractive by Hollywood standards. And yes, that has probably opened doors for me. But you know what else? I work 16-hour days. I study every script until I know it backwards. I do my own stunts and I try to bring something real to every character I play. But none of that matters to you, does it? All you see is the package, not the person inside it. Joy wasn't backing down. The package is exactly the problem when that package is being used to sell the idea that some people are genetically better than others. Nobody is selling that idea except you. Sydney snapped. You're the one who took a play on words about genes and turned it into a statement about genetic superiority. You created this controversy out of thin air because you needed something to be outraged about today. I didn't create anything, Joy shouted, her professional demeanor completely gone now. The implications were always there. The history is there. The problematic nature of celebrating whiteness is there. Just because you choose to ignore it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Sydney stepped back from the table, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. And just because you choose to see problems everywhere doesn't mean they're actually problems. Sometimes a commercial is just a commercial. Sometimes a joke is just a joke. Sometimes people can exist in the world without every single thing they do to being filtered through your lens of perpetual grievance. Perpetual grievance. Joy's voice reached a pitch that made several audience members WSE. Caring about equality isn't perpetual grievance. It's basic human decency. Something you clearly lack. That was the final straw. Sydney turned to face Joy directly, her voice cutting through the studio like a blade. Basic human decency. Joy, you've spent the last 15 minutes attacking me personally, questioning my character, dismissing my work, and suggesting I'm some sort of racist propagandist because I appeared in a clothing advertisement. If you want to talk about basic human decency, maybe you should start by looking in the mirror. Joy was trembling with rage now, her voice barely controlled. Don't you dare turn this around on me. Don't you dare make yourself the victim when you're the one who chose to profit from problematic messaging. I'm not making myself the victim, Sydney replied, her voice eerily calm now. I'm simply pointing out that your version of social justice looks a lot like personal destruction. You're not fighting for equality, Joy. You're fighting to tear down anyone who doesn't fit your narrow definition of acceptable behavior. The silence that followed was suffocating. Joy and Sydney stared at each other across the table, both breathing heavily, both clearly past the point of no return. The other hosts sat frozen, unsure whether to intervene or simply let this play out to its inevitable conclusion. Finally, Joy spoke, her voice quiet, but filled with finality. I think this interview is over, Sydney nodded slowly, never breaking eye contact. I think you're right, but neither of them moved. They stood there locked in a battle of wills that had transcended the original topic and become something far more primal, far more personal. The studio held its collective breath, waiting to see who would blink first, who would walk away, who would end this confrontation that had already gone further than anyone thought possible. The stalemate lasted exactly 14 seconds. 14 seconds of two powerful women staring each other down while an entire television studio held its breath. Then Joy made a decision that would end her career on The View. You know what, Sydney? Joy said, her voice taking on a cold, calculated tone that was somehow more frightening than her earlier shouting. I've had enough of entitled little princesses like you, thinking you can waltz into any space and expect everyone to bow down to your privilege. Sydney's eyebrows shot up. Entitled little princesses. Joy, you're on national television calling a guest names because she disagreed with you. Who exactly is acting entitled here? I'm acting like someone who's tired of watching this country slide backward while people like you profit from it. Joy replied, moving around the table now, closing the distance between them. I'm acting like someone who remembers when we actually fought for progress instead of just posing for magazine covers. Whoopi finally found her voice. Joy, I think we need to take a commercial break. But Joy ignored her completely, her focus laser focused on Sydney. You want to know what your problem is? You've never had to struggle for anything real in your life. You've never had to prove you belonged anywhere. You just showed up looking the right way and everyone handed you everything. Sydney's calm facade cracked again. You don't know anything about my life, Joy. You don't know what I've sacrificed, what I've worked for, what I've overcome. You're making assumptions based on nothing but your own prejudices. Prejudices. Joy laughed bitterly. That's rich coming from someone who literally profits from genetic prejudice. There it is again, Sydney said, shaking her head in disbelief. The genetic prejudice conspiracy theory. Joy, listen to yourself. You're so desperate to be offended that you're inventing racism where none exists. Joy stepped closer, now within arm's reach of Sydney. I don't need to invent racism, sweetheart. It's been here all along. You're just too privileged to see it. The condescension in Joy's voice when she said, sweetheart, was unmistakable, and it hit Sydney like a physical blow. Her composure, already hanging by a thread, finally snapped completely. Don't you dare condescend to me, Sydney said, her voice low and dangerous. Don't you dare stand there and lecture me about privilege while you use your platform to bully guests who don't agree with your worldview. Bully. Joyce stepped even closer, her voice rising again. You keep using that word. I don't think you know what it means. I know exactly what it means. Sydney shot back, not backing down an inch. It means using your power to intimidate someone weaker than you. It means ganging up on someone who can't fight back on equal terms. It means exactly what you're doing right now. Joy's face was inches from Sydney's now. Both women vibrating with barely contained fury. If you think I'm bullying you, little girl, then you have no idea what real bullying looks like. Little girl, did you just call me little girl? The studio was so silent you could hear the cameras humming. Every person in that room knew they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years, something that would probably end careers and change lives. Joy's response was barely above a whisper, but it carried clearly through the studio. If the shoe fits, that was it. Sydney took a step forward, bringing them face to face, her voice cutting like glass. The only thing that fits here, Joy, is your reputation as a bitter old woman who can't stand to see younger women succeed. The gasp from the audience was audible. Calling Joy Behar a bitter old woman on live television was crossing every possible line, and everyone knew it. Joy's reaction was immediate and volcanic. How dare you? How dare you come into my house and disrespect me like that? Your house. Sydney laughed, but it was a harsh, ugly sound. This isn't your house, Joy. This is a television studio where you're supposed to be a professional. But instead you're acting like a jealous teenager who can't handle anyone getting attention that isn't you. Joy raised her hand, and for a terrifying moment it looked like she might actually strike Sydney. The gesture sent shock waves through the studio, and finally security began moving. That's enough. Whoopi's voice boomed through the studio with an authority that commanded attention. Security, please escort Miss Sweeney from the building. Sydney spun around, her face a mask of disbelief. Excuse me, you're kicking me out. She's the one who just tried to hit me. I said, that's enough, Whoopi repeated, her voice brooking no argument. This interview is over. Two security guards approached Sydney, their expressions professional but firm. Sydney looked around the studio, seeing the shocked faces of the audience, the frozen expressions of the other hosts, and finally Joy's triumphant smirk. This is unbelievable, Sydney said, her voice carrying clearly through the studio as the security guards flanked her. I come here to do a promotional interview and I get ambushed by someone who thinks disagreeing with her worldview is a crime. Got exactly what you deserved, Joy called out, unable to resist one final shot. Sydney stopped walking and turned back toward the table, her voice ringing with conviction. You know what I got, Joy. I got a perfect demonstration of everything that's wrong with cancel culture. I got to see firsthand how someone can twist an innocent advertisement into a weapon and then use that weapon to destroy someone's reputation. The security guards gently but firmly took Sydney's arms, beginning to escort her toward the exit. But Sydney wasn't finished. And you know what else I got? She called out, her voice carrying over the stunned silence. I got to show everyone watching exactly what happens when you refuse to apologize for things you didn't do wrong. When you refuse to bow down to the mob. When you stand up for yourself instead of letting bullies tear you down. Joy started to respond, but Whoopi cut her off with a sharp gesture. The cameras continued rolling as Sydney was led away, her head held high, her dignity intact despite the circumstances. Ladies and gentlemen, Whoopi said, her voice strained with the effort of maintaining professional composure, we're going to take a commercial break. But as the red recording lights dimmed, everyone in that studio knew that what they had just witnessed would be dissected, analyzed, and debated for months to come. The confrontation between Sydney Sweeney and Joy Behar had become more than just a television argument. It had become a cultural moment, a line in the sand, a perfect encapsulation of the divisions tearing at the fabric of American discourse. Sydney walked out of that studio with her head held high, escorted by security, unbroken by the experience. She had come in to promote her work and instead had ended up in a battle for her reputation, her character, and her right to exist in the public sphere without constantly apologizing for who she was. Joy remained at the table, still trembling with residual anger, still convinced she had been fighting the good fight, still believing that her actions had been justified by the righteousness of her cause. And somewhere in the middle of it all, the truth lay buried under layers of assumption, interpretation, and ideological warfare, waiting for someone brave enough to dig it out and examine it in the cold light of day. What do you think? Was Sydney right to stand her ground against what she saw as bullying and manufactured outrage? Or was Joy justified in holding her accountable for participating in what she viewed as problematic messaging? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more explosive celebrity confrontations and behind-the-scenes drama that the mainstream media won't show you.